Thank you to Christopher Matthew Spencer in Hollywood, California for sponsoring today's video. How important is it having NFL players in your film when trying to sell it?
It's definitely important, especially some of the ones that we have in the film. Brett Favre, Christian Okoye, Jim McMahon. These are all, like legends of the game. So to have them come out and share their story, it's important for the new generation, currently playing, and even up and coming players that, maybe that's their dream to be in the NFL. So for them to share their experience, it's real important to have them, and we're grateful to have them in the film.
Did you and your team sit down and think, who is this movie for?
Well, yeah. This movie is for a lot of people. It's for the athlete who wants to play the game. It's for the parents, of the athlete, because in this story, you hear the parental side of this and how it can affect the immediate family. So it's definitely for, I would say the everyday football fan who watches it. You kind of can't escape football season when it's on. It's on Monday Night Football. It's on Thursdays. It's on Sundays. You know what I mean? So it's definitely a part of, the American way.
How did Concussed the American Dream begin?
This journey began in 2016 when my partner on the film, David Kano, writer-director, was working on this as part of his thesis for his master.
Did you get involved together, or he had the idea for his master's?
He had the idea for his master's, and we were covering MMA and the sport of boxing at the time, so it kind of went hand in hand, covering the head trauma in these different sports. So it just basically turned into what the documentary is now.
Okay, so he's doing this research for his thesis, and at what point does he say, hey, this is a movie right here?
Yes, well, we came upon the story of Tyler Sash, who the film is about, and his passing, and we decided to tell the story of him, and we were able to meet his family, and they were able to, help us in telling Tyler's story.
Okay, and how long had you been planning the idea before you actually contacted Tyler's family?
Well, we had been interviewing different athletes, talking about head trauma and things that they go through, and everything from preparation, as far as, training, and the head trauma that they may take, and discussing possible concussions or big hits that they may have had. And so just as time went on, it had led us to creating this documentary. But we knew pretty much early on, after a few months, that, this is the story that we want to tell.
And how did you reach out to Tyler's family?
We were able to get his mother's number. I don't necessarily know how we got that. I think we interviewed a former player who played with him, Spencer Pasinger. He was on the team with Tyler. They both went to the Super Bowl that same year together. So actually we had an interview with him, and I think that may have led to how we contacted Tyler's mother.
And so was that the first set of interviews that you did? You flew to Iowa?
It was definitely part of the journey. We planned out our trip when creating this film. We went to various states, interviewed different athletes, and yes, we found our way in Iowa, where we were able to interview his mother, his sister, and his girlfriend that he had before he passed.
And you also were able to go around the town, which I thought was really, yes. It gave a great image of what life was like there.
Yeah, it was definitely a small town, and everybody knew who Tyler was. So it's a real tight community, and especially with playing sports and his background, he was very well known. He broke and still held or holds a lot of school records. So everybody knew who Tyler was there. So when he had passed, it was, heartbreaking.
How did Brett Favre come onto the film?
Brett Favre joined us in, helping tell Tyler's story. We actually got to interview him multiple times, and it was through that we were able to, he wanted to come on board. He, in the past, been very verbal about concussions, and so we learned as well his story in meeting him at these different times, and yeah.
How far into the film before you had the initial interview with Brett?
I think it definitely maybe was a couple years, because at first we kind of had a slow start as far as planning the trips out to interview the people across the country. But once he was on board, it was all go from there.
And so I'm sure you found that once this person with a name said yes, then that person, then it made it easier? Oh,
definitely, yeah. And we learned that or discovered that throughout the whole process of this film. You tell somebody about, who's in the film, and then they say, okay, yeah, I'll do the interview. And then it just adds to the list of, people who may want to be a part or share their time with us in order for us to interview them. There's a whole handful of athletes that we were able to interview, and family members of the athletes that actually didn't make the cut, just because it's definitely difficult to tell so many stories, in a small amount of time.
So it centers around Tyler's story?
Yes, centers around Tyler's story as well as Brett Favre as well.
And so 2017 is when you started with the actual interviews, or no, you did some in this?
I believe it was late 2016, and we just carried on into 2017. It's probably when we really ramped up.
And was there a point where you said, we don't know how long this will take?
Definitely. There was definitely many points where we're like, okay, we're done. But then, new stories would break. For instance, in 2018, when Ann McKee's study came out, there was 110 out of 111 NFL players' brains that they cut open had CTE. So that was a big study, and that's what led us up to Boston to interview her. She was on Time's Most 100 Influential People of 2018. She was able to cut open a brain in front of us.
Oh, wow.
And so currently that's the method of discovering if an athlete has CTE or not. You have to physically cut open the brain in order to see this tau protein, which is basically around blood vessels, and they can just determine how bad of a case somebody may have.
So it's only once someone has passed that they're able to determine?
Right, yeah, there's no biomarkers currently. They have some potential ones, but there's no biomarkers, so they can't tell if somebody has it when they're alive. I believe they can kind of speculate by some of the scans they can do. A PET scan was very telling, but when doing a PET scan, I believe you have to have the nuclear dye in you and have some radiation. So that's one factor, but other than that, yeah, you can't tell. It's until you're post-mortem, they say.
Wow. And these were all people that, had passed it. Did they know
Yeah.
why?
And that was definitely a serious thing, when going and interviewing these people's families, or even athletes that are still alive, that can be a touchy subject, because it's either something, that has passed and somebody has, is no longer alive, or maybe current issues that somebody's still dealing with in their life, and how vulnerable or open they're going to be to sharing their story.
Right. I don't want to give too much away about the film, but you definitely got some very intimate moments, and you definitely saw how much they cared for the people that they
Right,
lost.
yeah. We interviewed Super Bowl champ Jim McMahon, who's also in the film. He talks about, there's a big slam that he dealt with and big concussion, and he says, back then you just went back in the game. That's what you did. So there's kind of like a tough, macho, I guess, mentality that comes with the sport of football that I guess is a constant battle that these athletes are dealing with because, they want to stay in the game. They want to keep their job. So they don't want to go out, and lose their spot because they fought so hard, growing up, possibly playing youth football through high school and finally getting on a main team is, would be a big part of anybody's life.
Sure. And I'm not sure if it was in the film where Brett said this, that some people can withstand a certain impact and others, it's smaller of an impact, but it affects them more.
Yeah, so that's a big thing about CTE is everybody thinks it's about the concussions, but it can be about the subconcussive blows. So just the small hits themselves add up. And over time, the more damage you take, you may be worse off than others. It just depends on the person, I guess. But it is a neurodegenerative disease, so it constantly gets worse and over time will get worse. So for many young athletes, they may not see any changes or drastic changes, but years later, they may, experience these changes and realize, why am I feeling like this? We interviewed Christian Okoye. He was from the Kansas City Chiefs. So he goes into his story about, some of the changes that he has felt after his career.
Can you tell us what is CTE?
CTE is chronic traumatic encephalopathy. So it's something that they have discovered after the fact where athletes pass away. That's the way that they determine if you have CTE. There are these tau proteins that are, I guess everybody's brain has tau proteins, but they're finding them in other places, that they should not be. And more athletes have them than others. It just depends on how much damage they may have had. And definitely the time that they've played their sport can attribute to how much CTE or how, worse off they are having this disease. So it can be similar to Alzheimer's due to the fact of some of the findings that they find within the brain. So there's kind of a correlation there in a sense. Yeah.
So it mimics symptoms of dementia? Like what are some of the, I know you said you can't tell until the person has passed away if
right.
they had it.
Yeah, they're not exactly the same.
Oh.
But there was I believe it was ApoE4. It's a type of, they were looking at it as a biomarker to determine if somebody has CTE. So kind of the Alzheimer's aspects of it is, people are very forgetful, or they might find themselves in a place, say they went to go pick up a family member at an airport. They might find themselves at the airport and totally forget why are they there? Why am I here again? So there's definitely forgetful moments that some of these athletes experience, and it just it's kind of unspoken and unheard about, because we glorify these athletes. You see them on TV and just think that they're unstoppable, but in reality they're, a human being too, and they're dealing with these issues behind the scenes that the everyday viewer of the game doesn't get to see.
When you reached out to Brett initially for a first interview, what was his response to you?
He was open to it. We were definitely kind of, as we are with meeting any of these athletes, are, a little bit nervous meeting them, but he was very open and gracious with his time that we had with him. I believe the first time we met him, he was doing a signing. So he did have a small window that we had with him. And then the second time we were able to interview him, we were able to go to his house And that's what you see in the film. We were able to follow him around. He would tell different stories about his past and, coming into the league. And basically from there on, just, told us some of the issues that he deals with as a athlete.
Yeah, that was a great part of the film. I don't want to give too much away, but I enjoyed watching that. This might be, I don't know how correct this is from online research, but from small research, we saw that Brett Favre plays for, 20 plus years, and he had maybe 50 concussions per year?
Right. So, he went back and even with us, mentioned, playing through high school and college and into the NFL. So, he basically came up with, he could have had up to 1,000 concussions in his football career.
In the film, Brett kind of says, I don't want to know if I have it, because it's going to be on my mind. And I thought that was, that's really interesting. I hadn't really thought about that, about any disease in some sense.
Right, yeah. I think the mentality is that they don't want to know if they have it because there's not technically anything they can do after the fact. I believe there are things that they're experimenting with, like cold plunges and things like that, as far as improving. But they just don't want to know because, they're currently living their life and, if there's nothing they can do about it, they're better off not knowing that they have the disease. That's some of the athletes' point of view as far as them not wanting to know.
Oh, wow. So cold plunges are possibly something that would...
Yeah, I think that, and there was, I know there's cryotherapy and there's different types of things that may help in that. I think another issue is some people have the cerebral spinal fluid that I guess goes up into their brain, that they say. So it's all kind of, being discovered and figured out, trying to figure out what they can do.
Of the athletes that you reached out to, were many of them like, yes, I really want to talk about this, or did some that maybe didn't make the movie were hesitant?
Some people were definitely hesitant, but they were open to sharing their experience. And between the different athletes, a lot of them had the same similar traits, whether it's forgetfulness, depression, things like that.
Right. Yeah, I was looking up some of the symptoms that, mood changes, different things.
Right. Yeah, and there's been cases where people have been violent, to their own family or spouse. Public ones that have made the news. It's just something to look at. How does somebody who played this sport, what changed them, to become that kind of person that they weren't that person before.
Sure. Did you see from some of the research that you did in any of the athletes' stories that did have different things happen, whether it was very tragic or not, that it was kind of a spiraling down, maybe something bad happened and it set off a chain reaction?
I believe so. Because it is a neurodegenerative disease, so it can get worse over time. So I think it just, attributes to their lifestyle, especially after the game. If they're no longer a star player or no longer on the team, not only from the public, but possibly, their family, they may not be seen as the same, because they're no longer in the spotlight. Not saying that happens with all athletes, but that can be something that they go through. And then on top of that, they're dealing with this personal issue that they have that they don't know, why am I feeling a certain way? Why am I forgetting things? Why can't I, keep my attention, on point where I need to get certain things done? They're trying to find the answers, and their family as well, doesn't have the answers for them. So.
What are some of the best moments you had making the movie?
There's been many moments that, were great moments. We got to go to different Super Bowl events and meet some of these athletes when making this film. That's definitely a highlight. But a lot of these people that we're reaching out to, may be dealing with this head trauma issue. So it wasn't always, happy moments, especially when they're dealing with their own battles or struggles.
Yeah, I would imagine that would be difficult because you're getting these stories and you're the movie's coming together, but at the same time, there's a sadness behind what the story's about. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. There was a football player, Gary Kutzinger. He played for the Oilers back in the late '60s, I believe. And he's somebody who you could tell physically, the way he walked. He would be repetitive with some of his stories. And he was being vocal about, the head trauma and that these older athletes had dealt with, many years ago. And they kind of felt forgotten as the sport continues to grow. So it was that was a sad moment as far as, getting to meet an athlete that maybe, the current generation may not know him by name.
What was your emotional state with working on this film for so long? Both the two of you and David.
Yeah. Well, it definitely takes a drive to, work on something so big as far as this documentary goes. So, we definitely had to have the energy to, get up and go and interview these people. Sometimes we interviewed multiple people within the same day, with drives in between, traveling and whatnot. But definitely by the end of the day, you're, run down, and you've heard so many stories that are definitely touching. And so it just opened your eyes to, the other lifestyles that some of these athletes have, despite what you see on TV.
And how would you know you got the footage that you needed when, let's suppose you had a flight the next morning and wanted to make sure?
Right, yeah. Over time, we had kind of had, I would say, a pretty big list of questions as far as that we would ask some of these players. And that's kind of how we knew. They would give us a response, and, they were very vocal. A lot of these athletes they have a personality, a big personality, So it wasn't too hard as far as interacting with them and hearing these stories. And especially if they were going through something, it took a lot for them to open up, but once they did, it was very telling.
And then just from a filmmaking standpoint, you would then go back to the hotel and make sure you got all the footage that you need, or do it right there on the spot?
Oh, definitely, yeah. Sometimes we did some traveling in the car as well. So, we'd have a laptop, we have multiple hard drives, make sure that there's, 2 copies of the same day's footage, make sure it's on the second drive before, clearing it from the memory card. There was a lot technically as far as from the filmmaking aspect to make sure, this is somebody telling you about their life. And so you want to treat the footage with care. You don't want to accidentally delete it. Some locations, where maybe in a snowy area, you don't want to drop it. It just a lot of handling of the equipment that you just have to, treat the footage with care.
If you had a chance to meet Tyler Sash, what would you say to him?
I guess I would ask him, would he want to continue playing, knowing the result that he had? Many players would want to, especially to achieve a goal. In his case, he was able to go to the Super Bowl. I believe it was his rookie year. So that's a dream, that many of these players, hope for in their career, but may never attain, But he did have some physical issues. He had a shoulder injury that he wanted to have surgery on. And so I just, would like to know, would he want to continue, or, could he maybe pivot into something else and, maybe even help other players possibly, I don't know, after the fact. If he had the knowledge of how this was going to all play out, I guess we would all, in hindsight, it's different.
Right. Yeah, it's not just to the notoriety, but it also can be a ticket out of poverty for some players,
Right,
drastically change not only their lives, but their families' lives.
Right. Yeah, and we, in the film we show, he actually originally grew up playing basketball. So he thought his whole life he was going to be a basketball player. So he transitioned at one point into football, which I played football as well, youth sports growing up. And I've had a concussion as well. So, it's something that many players are, football players from young to professional are not going to make it to the professional level, So it's just, I guess, questionable whether or not somebody wants, should play or not tackle football.
Right. Is that something that helped drive you through the film, is that you had experienced a concussion yourself?
Yeah, I would say so, because I played for many years. I think it may be like 6 years. I only played 1 year of high school, but I definitely seen the change as far as, athletes in size growing up from when I played Pop Warner to high school. But, football was is a sport that I love, and I played for so long. So there's an old clip of me being interviewed where
great.
Somebody's asking me, what do I like about the game? And I say hitting people, tackling them. And then they ask me, what kind of sounds do you hear on there? And I would say helmet smashing. So looking back, it's kind of, ironic that even as a young kid, somehow I was glorifying it because, that's what football was, get the big hit, get the big tackle, and score a touchdown, win the game, So it's part of the game. It's a contact sport. But from a young age, it's just something that, I was taught or brought into, and yeah.
Right, so then that would make sense. You would stay with something not just to have an amazing film out, but also there was a personal element for you in it.
Right,
They helped carry it.
Yeah, and getting to meet, different athletes along the way has been, it's you don't get to meet, a famous athlete or something every day. So getting to make a film about them and really getting to know some of these people and tell their story was a good experience.
Sure, and you're seeing the human side of them, which we only see the superhero side.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. It takes you on a different a ride, in a sense that you're seeing the highs of people's careers, and we can all want to sort of live vicariously through them, and then you don't see maybe the private pain, And I think one thing Brett Favre said just in passing was just after 50 no one cares or whatever. I'm like, oh, I'm sure they still care about you, but
right.
That's an interesting thought because it's still relatively young. You don't think that, but yeah, that you feel like maybe your best days are behind you, and how difficult that would be. But I still think that's not so much the case for some of these people. But maybe that
and
is.
In some sense, some of these athletes are retiring earlier nowadays. Some maybe for smarter reasons. Maybe they're becoming aware of these issues and figuring out how to make a career after the game. So that's one way to look at it. Somebody like Brett, everybody loves him. They call him the gunslinger. They just love the way he played the game, and he just gave it his all.
Right, and I was listening to an interview that he did maybe, a year ago, and just in research for this, and he said he'd love to coach people that are younger, not maybe while they're about to be offered all this money and all the sort of accolades that go with it, but to get them before some of the limelight and all that sort of gets in the head.
Yeah, and I think he's spoken about the fundamentals, learning the fundamentals of the game, kind of before, playing tackle football. That's one thing that's kind of being considered, is maybe playing flag football up until potentially high school. Christian Okoye, who I believe he was originally a track athlete, didn't begin playing football until when he was in college, and his father, I guess, didn't want him to play. But he was just such a, like a freak athlete, and had basically the fundamentals to play the game, and was able to learn it, and found, he was on the Kansas City Chiefs.
After spending years on this film with David Kano, will you look at the game of football the same?
I definitely don't look at football the same, because pretty much on every play there's some sort of impact. So whether it's the guys on the line going head to head, or whether it's the running back being tackled, or the receiver being hit after catching the ball. I mean, there's plenty of incidences throughout the game where you can see that contact, and it is a contact sport. So, but after doing the research and being able to interview these different players, it's hard to look at the game the same. I guess looking back to when I was younger, maybe I don't know if I was a little bit naive to what was happening. I didn't know that these these head trauma or minor subconcussive blows could eventually lead up to something like CTE. So it's something, I guess I don't look at the game the same. I guess from youth to high school to professional. It just seems like everybody's putting their body and their brain at risk for the sake of entertainment.
Thank you for watching the video all the way to the end. Here is a complimentary question from our book Story Questions.